colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my immense pleasure to welcome you all to today's special event, which is from Sapru House launch to Sri Ram Road, commemorating 50 years of Institute of Chinese Studies, organized by Institute of Chinese Studies and Indian Council of World Affairs. I would like to brief you about today's program. There is minor change in the program. Mr. Ashok Kantha, Director, Institute of Chinese Studies, will make welcome remarks, which will be followed by a slideshow of old photographs of ICS. After the slideshow, there will be 3 sessions of short duration. The first session on ICS at 50, past and present, will be chaired by Dr. TCA Raghavan, Director General ICWA, Professor Ashish Nandi, Honorary Fellow CSDS, Ambassador Kishan Rana, Emeritus Fellow ICS, Professor Madhavan Palat, Professor of History, formerly with JNU, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, Honorary Fellow ICS. They will make their short remarks in the session. Session 2 will be chaired by Professor Alka Acharya. This will be a session in which three experts will share their views, and it is titled The Daughters of Pioneer. The third session will be chaired by Mr. Ravi Bhutlingam. Actually, this is a minor change which we have. And in this session, Dr. Madhurima Nandi, Associate Fellow ICS, Dr. Nirmola Sharma, Research Associate ICS, and Dr. P.K. Anand, Research Associate ICS, and Dr. Beda Vaidyanathan, Research Associate ICS, will make their remarks. We will conclude this the session by 5:25, by 7:25. Since the sessions are in short duration, so there will be no break, and we will just make change in the nameplates. By this, may I request Ambassador Ashok Kantha to kindly give his welcome remarks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for introducing the program. Well, very good afternoon or good evening to all of you. It's good to have a full house to help us celebrate 50 years of the journey of Institute of Chinese Studies and its precursor, the China Study Group. It's really appropriate that we are organizing this function at Sapru House, because the ICS story started on the lawns of Sapru House way back in 1969, when a group of China scholars and experts started meeting on the lawns of this very, iconic building, and that's how CSG started, China Study Group started. And a couple of months ago, we were discussing with Ambassador Raghavan that how the journey of the Institute of Chinese Studies started at Sapru House, and he very kindly offered to co-host this function. So a very special thank you to Raghavan for co-hosting this event and this very special event. As I mentioned, the ICS has grown out of the kernel of CSG, which started meeting every Wednesday, exactly 50 years ago, in August 1969, to discuss current developments in China. We have with us, again, very appropriately, 2 of the members of the original group who started the China Study Group, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty and Ambassador Vinod Khanna. In 1978, the group found a home at CSDS, Center for Study of Developing Societies, and it expanded its activities. It not only continued the Wednesday seminars, but added various activities to take forward the work of understanding China. In 1990, I'm giving you a potted history of ICS. In 1990, the informal group constituted itself as Institute of Chinese Studies. And it became a program within, CSTS. And here again, very appropriately, we have with us Professor Ashish Nandi, former director of CSDS, who will be sharing his thoughts on very close, intimate links that exist and have existed, continue to exist between the ICS and the CSDS. Taking the journey forward, in 2010, Ministry of External Affairs, stepped in very significantly, and I would like to put on record, our appreciation for the contribution and assistance and support very consistently provided by Ministry of External Affairs. So 2010, with the encouragement, the ICS was registered as a society. And in 2012, we moved into our own premises at Shriram Road, and that's how this, caption of From Sapru House launched to Shriram Road. We are presently located in Shriram Road. In 2012, we had our full-time director, Alka is here, Professor Alka Acharya, the first director of ICS. We got our core faculty, and the journey has continued. By any account, it has been a remarkable story worth commemorating. This evening, our colleagues will recall this journey, share some memories, and equally important, look ahead, take stock of the unfinished agenda and future directions of the growth of both the Institute of Chinese Studies and China Studies in general. We can take, I'll claim, some legitimate pride in how the ICS has emerged as a vibrant research institute committed to promoting interdisciplinary research on China and the rest of East Asia, how it has shaped up as a meaningful platform to generate public discourse on various aspects of China and East Asia, how it has developed as an active forum which brings together China scholars from all over the country through All India Conference China Studies, India Forum on China at Goa, and series of other initiatives throughout the year, how it has made a mark as a catalyst to nurture China studies in India and contribute in a modest way to capacity building relating to China. I would especially like to mention that something which started way back in 1969, the tradition of Wednesday seminars, has continued uninterrupted for 50 years. Every Wednesday, with the exception of short break we take in June and December, early January, we have Wednesday seminars round the year. This tradition has been maintained. And another tradition which we again take a lot of satisfaction in is China Report. China Report this year is marking its 55th year, and it's the flagship journal, the only, if I may claim, peer-reviewed quarterly journal on China and East Asia coming out from India at present. And we cherish many international linkages and collaborations we have forged over the years. The story of the CSG, China Study Group, and ICS is also closely intertwined with the progress of China studies in India. With a new generation of China scholars, actively contributing, we are perhaps at a turning point in the development of China studies in the country. Yet, we are acutely conscious of the fact that a huge deficit exists as far as the needs of what we should be doing to promote China studies, and what we are doing at present, not only as ICS, but through sister institutions like ICWA and a whole lot of other partners. So much ground remains to be covered. And the imperative of developing the architecture of China studies in India is even more pressing today than in the past. This because we must have a nuanced understanding of China as our largest neighbor. China is a factor geography for us as a country with which we have a very complex relationship. The rise of China is arguably has been the most important geopolitical development globally over the past century. China is the leading strategic challenge for us, and China is also simultaneously a source of great opportunities. So we need to understand China. We must have a holistic understanding of history, culture, society, economy, politics, and international relations of China and of India-China relations. We must continue to endeavor to forge a uniquely Indian perspective on China studies, which still eludes us. Thus, as Dr. Sanjeev just, introduced, this get-together is not only about looking back and celebrations. It's also about looking ahead and rededication. While our senior colleagues will review the past, our young colleagues will delve on the future. We'll also recall the contributions of the pioneers of the China Study Group and the Institute of Chinese Studies. But as Professor Manoranjan Mahanti, who is the real sutradhar of this evening's function, has kept reminding us, it must be a fun evening after all. Thank you very much and welcome once again.
This was 1978, July, when Professor Chi Hsien Lin visited India as a guest of Delhi University. And this is arts faculty. And you'll recognize Artatran Naik sitting there, retired professor of Chinese from Santiniketan. And Gopa Joshi, yeah. This is
Chinese language school at Hong Kong.
Hong Kong Language School, 1963, which Ambassador Rana and Patricia Oberoi.
Patricia, my neighbor.
You can notice that. This is 1965, when the Department of Chinese Studies had just started, and Han Chung was the teacher. And next one, VP Dutt had joined by then as the head of the department. And Than Chung, then Thanwan, Sangasen Singh, Professor R.K. Dasgupta, Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor B.N. Ganguly, next to VP Dutt. And Professor Hu Chang-tu, C.T. Hu, visiting professor in education. And Huang Yishu, the next. This is the same group again, but this time Harold Han, who later on set up the Himalayan Foundation, sitting next to VP Dutt. And Govind Kelkar there. This is 1967, Berkeley. VP Dutt was in the Indian delegation to UN, and he also came to Berkeley to give a talk. Well, the same group again, 78. Oh, Jaishankar today, he's amongst us. There he is. Carry on. This is Hong Kong, 1979. Well, this is a, Than Chen Lin, Vice Chairman of NPC Standing Committee. There me and the Odisha India-China Friendship Association President, poet Manmohan Mishra in Beijing. This is another very Now we are in ICS. Giridhar Shankar, GPD. From there you can see, yeah. Ajit Bhattacharya at the end, Patricia, Rangi, Vinod, Geeta, Bridge. That's right. This is Meera and Kalindi Deshpande, a great picture. Giri, Ajit Bhattacharya, Bridge, Tankha, Patricia. Yeah. And this is Patricia again, Thanchung, Meera, KP Gupta, Huang Yishu. This is in IIC after a seminar. PR Chari there, you could see. In Bhubaneswar, we had an ICS Utkal University joint seminar. After that, we went to Konark. That is Konark. This is Puri Beach. Vinod Khanna. And this was in Hyderabad. Right, Utsa Patnaik. I think that was Sapru House, no? GPD, Kishan Rana. This is Nalin Suri attended the POA forum. And this is the former Prime Minister based with former Prime Minister Gujral in POA forum. And Amit Mitra, POA forum in the middle. These are the, this is Ramos, then the POA forum president, and Bob Hawke, Australian Prime Minister. Review of China Studies in India 2006. This is a very important conference which really launched the new phase of Chinese studies in India. Madhavi had organized that. Ashish, Patricia. That was the conference. Yeah, this is 2000. A delegation to China and Mongolia. GPD, Meera, Giri, Vinod, we were all there. This is ICS in Rajpur Road. This is the Friendship Award.
This is the various all India conference of China studies, and this is one of the flagship events of the ICS. So this is the fifth one at the bottom. The top left is the last one, the most recent one we just concluded in Bangalore, and the one on the right is in Bombay in 2016. So this is a This is the India-China Think Tank Forum, which we had in 2016, the first think tank forum which ICS and ICWA had collaborated and hosted. This was one of the events which involved China scholars Indian scholars working on China in China. This is event which was held at the former Assistant Director and Fellow Dr. Jamal Jacob and Dr. This is one of the events which we had conducted in 2015-16. This was the China Symposium in association with the Ashtra Center. This is one of the many events. This event is, I think, at the Symbiosis International. I think Ambassador
Speak to the mic.
Rana was involved in this. So, as you see, Professor Acharya, Mr. Muthalingam. This is one of the events which involves students, and this is one of the scholar in residence and programs which we have linkages with universities and institutions to promote China studies. This is a Wednesday seminar. This is at the new location. This is at Sriram Road. So this is a conference which we had on tuberculosis control. The health vertical is something which we have as a solid program at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Dr. Nandi and Professor Ramabaru and Dr. Madhurima Nandi, you can see there in the pictures. This was in 2016. This was another immersion program we held with the United Board of Christian Higher Education in Asia. It was held in January 2017. former director Professor Acharya is there. This is one of the other events which the ICS is a founding member. This is the Track 2 initiative, the Russia-India-China trilateral. This is the 15th one. We are now about to have the 17th one in Beijing in September. Another one of the initiatives of the institute, again, one of the founding members, this is the BCIM Economic Corridor. The BCIM project, actually, ICS was the nodal institution. So this is the Joint Study Group meeting in 2017. Another flagship event of the ICS, the Giridhar Shankar Memorial Lecture. This was in 2017. David Schambog had done that. This usually happens between February and March. This is the release of Professor Monti's book, China's Transformation. This happened in 2018, January. Again, one of the special seminars and collaborative events we had. This is another thing which we started in 2017, the ICS Conversations. We have had about 3 to 4 conversations as of now. This is one of them in 2018. The VP Dutt Memorial Lecture, which the ICS hosted this year. Professor Prasenjit Dwara, who was then Kotari Chair at the CSDS, he spoke on this event. This is an event which we started out of the collaborations with the Harvard Enching Institute. We have had the Harvard Enching Institute ICS fellowship program, which we started in 2014. So after the program, now we have started an event in 2018 where all the Harvard Enching fellows go to different universities. So the first one was in Doon University. It happened in 2018. This one is the second one in 2019. Again, to take China studies to different parts of the country and also explain and also get more people into the fellowship in the future. This is one of the signature events which we started in 2018, the India Forum on China. This is held in collaboration with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. This is the second edition which was held in Goa in 2018. The third edition happens this December, again in Goa. This is the book we brought out on the Party Congress. So this was a host of scholars and people associated with ICS and also otherwise contributing to different aspects of China with regard to the Party Congress. So this was released in February 2019. This is an event on Africa which was held by ICS, and Dr. Veda Vaidyanathan is the African expert in our institution. So this is something resulting out of a field work she did and a monograph which is going to come out. So this was a roundtable event which happened this April. Another initiative, again, a lot of collaborations which we have. This is with the Manipal Academy of Higher Education on India-China relations. The Meishan Dialogues follow-up. This was in March 2019. We'll have the next one in China. This is different delegation visits which keep coming to the ICS. This is the latest one, which was one in 2019. And this was the workshop which we conducted with PhD students who are just about entering the PhDs or interested in PhDs on working on methods, research methods in China studies. This was held in collaboration with the Shiv Nadar University. This is one of the recent events which the director and Mr. Bhuthalingam were part of in China. Again, another delegations, yeah, so that's it. Thanks.
May I now request Dr. TCA Raghavan, DG ICWA, to kindly come on the dais. May I also now request Professor Ashish Nandi, Ambassador Kishan Rana, Professor Madhavan Palat, and Professor Manoranjan Mohanty to kindly come on the dais. May I now request DG ICWA to kindly conduct the proceedings. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to the ICWA and to Sapru House for this very important commemorative event on 50 years of the Institute of Chinese Studies. I think the ICWA, because it's been around for such a long time, is quite good at this kind of event. And if you look around the photographs, sometime around when the Chinese Institute of Chinese Studies or the China Study Group came into existence, there was a Lenin commemorative seminar over here. And you can see the photograph in one of our corridors, and it's a useful reminder because we hardly encounter Lenin's name now except in the pages of the Economic and Political Weekly. I'm, of course, somewhat intimidated having to chair this session, so I will confine myself only to welcoming all of you. I'm intimidated in part because I'm somewhat of a minority in a room full of China experts, but also with the speakers we have with us on this panel, Professor Ashish Nandi, very well known. All of us have grown up reading his many books and essays. Ambassador Kishan Rana, in many ways a legend in the Ministry of External Affairs and a great guide to all of us who have been his subordinates in the Ministry of External Affairs in the past. Professor Madhavan Palat, who taught me in the Center for Historical Studies, again many years ago, but still his lectures remain very vivid to all of those who have had the opportunity of sitting in any of his classes. And finally, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, who we already heard, and really the Sutradhar, as Ashok Khan said earlier today for this evening. So may I very quickly, since we have many speakers and there are two more sessions to follow, begin by asking Professor Ashish Nandi to talk about the Institute of Chinese Studies at 50 and its past.
I shall be very brief because I do not really have much to say. Is it okay? Can you hear me? Such occasions are increasingly becoming for me a matter of torture. Frankly, I feel whenever I am in a meeting like this that I am walking into a mortuary because the China Institute of Chinese Studies that I knew has only two survivors here, as somebody has pointed out already. The rest are dead. But it is also a fact that whenever I come to a situation like this, some of the names and some of the people haunt me. Because China study, particularly in this institute, was a labor of love for those who started it. An enormous effort, enormous degrees of self-sacrifice went into it. C.R.M. Rao, the editor whom I saw for many years working on China Report, used to edit each and every paper submitted to the journal from beginning to end, and the selected ones also he would personally edit them. Sometimes he would take the help of Giridhar Shankar, but otherwise he will do it himself. And that was a back-breaking job. After C.R.M. Rao came MP Sinha, and he probably worked for something like 7-8 years, maybe a little bit more. And he was even more of an obsessive-compulsive character. He not only edited each of the essays submitted and selected for publication, he would give the authors 3 or 4 options in each changes he would make. So the author doesn't feel that he has missed out on some technicality. So he would say something like, in case you have this meaning in mind, you can use the first option. No, it's a back-breaking thing. And he would do this year in, year out, month in, month out, day in, day out. It was a fantastic achievement. I've never met an editor like this in my life. There were others also. And they were, by the way, I must tell this, also point out this, that one of the reasons for the success of as an institution was this, that it quickly acquired a personality. Because usually institutions in India derive their character from the founder. And after the founder's demise or retirement, gradually they become more chaotic, scattered, and lose their personality. They still remain good institution with often very competent scholars, but they don't have an identifiable character. As one of the few persons who have seen this institution from its very beginning, I will suggest you something which I am sure will not sound very fashionable or acceptable. I think the strength of the ICS was this, that it gave each of the intellectuals involved in it complete freedom to look at China the way he or she wanted. There was never any overemphasis on the pragmatics of research or pragmatics of knowledge on China. It was not instrumental rationality which guided their study of China. It was critical rationality. And therefore, Institute of Chinese Studies also was almost, you can call it, debating society amongst themselves, which was one of his strengths, that before others read it, what they write or what they wrote, they will get the feedback from their colleagues. The internal debate, because none of them agreed with anybody else. Yeah. And I like that atmosphere. And it blended perfectly with CSDS. There was an implicit awareness. I am saying implicit because many of them will not probably say that this was not in our agenda. There was an implicit awareness that when two civilizations come face to face in an arena of research or serious study, then it is always a matter of a different kind of emotion, where you are simultaneously that other civilization, that other, so to speak, becomes, that specific other becomes a source of temptation as well as source of seduction. Or particularly if there are adjacent civilizations, and particularly given that these were two functioning civilizations which had history of 3,000 years, both of them. This mix of seduction and, if I may say so, temptation, this mix of fear of being flooded by it or overwhelmed by it, and also the feeling that it might be doing something better than us in some ways and something of it can be learned from them, is, I think, a normal and natural process of interaction between civilizations. Civilizations never learn from each other, and like human beings, never learn from the experiences of others. They only learn from the experiences of themselves. And it is not that I'm talking of, that kind of learning. I'm talking of the kind of learning that where you internalize part of the other civilization with certain kind of ambivalence, and you also try to avoid becoming like something else when you don't want to be that overwhelmed by that civilization. This is the case with not only the relationship between China and India, it is more dramatically evident in the case of China and Japan. It is more, I would say, elegantly available in the case of India and the Persian civilization. Many people do not know that Persian was the predominant language in India for something like 700 years. And even that idol of Hindu nationalism, Shivaji, his official language was Persian. Nobody mentions that. It's not fashionable to mention that. So there is this part of the story. There is this part of the story, and this group of scholars were implicitly aware of this, because they did not look only at applied knowledge, did not emphasize on strategic studies. They were not useful in the conventional sense to either the Indian state or to the many of the young students who wanted to learn Chinese because it widens your business choices. So people knowing Chinese are at a premium today. So that is a way of looking at institutions and research areas which I think we are increasingly losing. Because knowledge is not that easily, cannot that easily coexist with instrumentality. Somewhere there should be some passion that you cannot get from other ways of doing the same thing. That passion defines how good work is produced. And I do hope Institute of China Studies, Institute of Chinese Studies will not lose that particular strand in its tradition and will somehow or other sustain it even in its future work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Ambassador Rana.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Raghavan. Friends, in the days when I was active on China affairs in the ministry, first as a student in Hong Kong and then working in Delhi in two time periods, 65, 67 and 70, 72, I must confess that unlike my good friend Vinod Khanna, I did not have any real connection with the institute. But what strikes me from what Professor Nandi has put so elegantly is that here is an institution whose history, whose metamorphosis, the stages it has traversed, needs some kind of examination, if only to see how a think tank, autonomous, hugely underfunded, desperately poor, lacking all kinds of material resources, comes into being. And how it managed way back in the late 60s and early 70s to launch a periodic, a journal of academic quality that remains still a kind of landmark in India, namely China Report. So lacking this personal historical perspective, I will take the easier option and try and look a little bit to the future in terms of what needs to be done. My first thought is that, and this doesn't really relate just to the Institute or even to China studies, we are really unique among countries that a young person can study an area. It may be Arab affairs, it may be Japanese affairs, Russian affairs, or Chinese affairs without learning the language. I mean, this is an aberration that should not exist, but it continues to exist. There are people who have done PhDs in India without having learned the root language of that particular region or area or country that they have studied. This desperately needs to change. And even while it doesn't change, because education reform in India is something that we talk about all the time and implement almost never, young people, students, should on their own make it a point that even if it is not a requirement, that they master the language. That's my first point. I have a second point, which is that China studies and this institute in the 15, 18 years that I've been fairly closely associated with it, has struggled to bring into its ambit of scholarship, its ambit of contacts, its ambit of scholarly linkages, people who are not experts on China. That is to say, economists, historians, environmental scientists, economists in particular, social scientists, who have their root knowledge, their core scholarship in their particular discipline, and to expose them to a China relationship and to China studies. This has met only with limited success, and it's not really a challenge just for this institute. It is again part of a wider challenge of scholarship in India. And that brings me to my third and final point, which is that we grossly underfund all kinds of studies, all kinds of scholarship, and all kinds of research. There are a few fortunate institutes that have sizable resources, and that's wonderful. But most institutions, including this particular institute, have constantly struggled literally to survive. That again is a kind of semi-private history that people shouldn't really bandy about, but it deserves examination only from the perspective that scholarship cannot move forward in India, be it in relation to China or Japan or Russia or Latin America or any other, Africa, any other part of the world, without resources. There are a few business houses that have taken a larger enlightened view and have supported institutions. The ICS has benefited enormously from support from Tata Trusts and from several other business houses that have come forward when the institute faced desperate times, virtually had to think maybe even of closure because its back was really to the wall. There must be some better way in which we as a country help, consider, support such entities. The CSR provisions of the Indian law, where companies are encouraged to support social activities, somehow does not include this kind of research or this kind of institutes. So that option is also closed, and the official options are, shall we say, have never been easy and perhaps are more difficult as the times roll by, simply because the demand is too great. Institutions, research institutes need a broad base of support. And somehow this institute, ICS, with celebrating now its 50th anniversary, surely qualifies for some measure of support. And we've even talked about some kind of crowdfunding, not literally crowdfunding, but appeal for funding. Somehow that idea seems not to have moved forward very much, but there are many options available, and these have to be tried out. If we are candid among ourselves, and this is essentially a family celebration, I think we can talk about this. I will stop here because there are other speakers, and I want to, for my part, congratulate the Institute, congratulate people like Manu Mohanty, Vinod Khanna, and so many others, Vijay Nambiar, Ravi Bhutalingam, the great professors, Alka and Srimati and Shaubari, and so many others who have been really the great support of this institute. It should inspire young people to move forward and associate themselves with an entity like this. Not just this institute, but many others that also merit our support. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Pala.
It's working. Thank you very much, Dr. Raghavan. I'm delighted to find the chairman is a former student of mine, and who once again has to be subjected to one of the things I say. I feel a bit of an interloper here, as I've seldom attended meetings here. On 2 occasions I have, but I can at least say that I have published in the China Quarterly. So I have, I hope, cleared the hurdle and justified my existence and presence. I must say I'm an I come, as it were, from the other side, from across the great bad border, the nomadic space and the tiger forest, go on and on into Moscow. Not the best of friends of China, and I don't think they've been friends ever, as far as I know, throughout the histories of both countries. And the Russians have very bad things to say about the Chinese. So whenever I've gone to Russia, I've heard only negative things. They are much worse than we are, as far as the image of China goes and the kinds of things they say. So I do feel that I'm coming from there to be amongst China specialists is a bit odd in a way. But the reason why the conflict or the distance between Russia and China has existed for so long, for whatever the reasons might be, the results have been good in one way. The Russians have studied China very well indeed. Enmity does good things. It makes you good scholars of each other, like the Americans have. Everybody they hate, they study extremely well. So the Russians have done it so well. The Institute of Far Eastern Studies is one of the great institutes in Russia, and they've got not only superb collections and archives, but excellent scholarship. Not much of it translated, but on the little that I've read, since I'm not a specialist on China, I've always been immensely impressed by the depth of the scholarship that exists in Russia. So it has borne good results. For that reason, if India and China are not on the best of terms, perhaps it's a good thing. It leads to, again, good results. And I can see that is exactly what has happened. I feel so envious that the Institute of China Studies exists here and is now celebrating its 50th year. I have nothing of that kind to show about Russia, India and Russia. There's no such Central Institute of India-Russia Studies where regular activity goes on, where regular studies goes on, and where these kinds of papers and publications occur. We've had an immensely long record of Indo-Soviet friendship, and I suppose Indo-Russian friendship, and Putin has gone to the extent of instantly supporting us on our latest action in Kashmir, almost going back to Soviet times, it seems. So friendship exists, but also enormous ignorance. The result of so much friendship, we haven't bothered about studying each other seriously. And it's an enormous gap, I've always felt, in earlier days, and it's an even greater gap now. Now there's almost no interest in Russia. I don't know why. Russia still seems pretty large on the map, as far as I can see, and there ought to be. But in India, very little. Professionally, I mean, people do not commit themselves to it. They don't commit themselves in the way that Ashish Nandi has just reminded us. You need to have a passion for it. And without passion, you can't study seriously. The purely instrumental purpose of trying to get a job somehow and getting it on the cheap doesn't help very much. But unfortunately, that's been the fate of Russia. I do not know what the exact answer for that is, how it can be remedied. We just need to have much wider horizons than we actually do. And at least I'm immensely encouraged to see that wider horizon exists in this case, as far as China is concerned. But there's so much more to be done, as we've just been reminded by Ambassador Rana. We need much deeper studies. It has to go far more than we have been able to do. And I'm happy to see a good diplomat speaking like a good professor and say, we need much more funding for academic studies. That's the sort of thing I would say, but I'm glad to see a diplomat also thinks exactly the same way. I couldn't agree with him more. But exactly how do you do it? The investments are so large that are required for serious research. I've always encountered that whenever we wanted to do something serious, people back off. There's no money in the country, apparently. Apparently, I say, because there seems to be money for a whole lot of other things, but not when it comes to serious study. And you can't get it on the cheap. That's quite simple. You have to learn the language, and after learning the language, you have to be able to use the language. Minimally, there has to be some books around and libraries to be able to use it. It's not enough to learn the language. You're not a tourist guide. You're meant to be something much more. And as Ambassador Raghavan will tell you, learning the language is an enormous problem. I used to have a problem with teaching my students the most elementary names of the Russian personalities and places. They had to get their tongues around names like Pobedonostsov, an important character in the 19th century, but not very easy to pronounce. He was a difficult man, and his name was difficult also. So you have these things all the time cropping up. And with China, Central Asia, and Russia, the problem is names kept changing. The same place went through at least 4 different name changes. You know these histories only too well. And the Chinese have added to the difficulty going and changing the spelling. So it's almost impossible to do all that. I recently had the problem of handling all this when I was editing the UNESCO history of Central Asia. The authors were from a number of different countries, and each one had their own convention of spelling. So I was wondering how on earth I could ever understand which place he was talking about, because the spelling was so utterly different from anything I have known. Whether it was Russian transliteration into English, depending which one of the conventions you used, then which of the Central Asian versions, which of the Mongolian versions, which of the Chinese versions, and then the English versions. By the time you got through the lot, you have to be a great multilingual specialist. So the problems are enormous, and the investment required is so enormous, and that this is what policymakers do need to realize, that the investment required to become a serious student of any area is really donkey's years. After your university education, you still have to spend another 10 years at least before you become, in the most elementary sense, a specialist. Now, who has a funding for that, who has the interest in sustaining himself or herself in that, and then being able to find a job and continuing your life in that, it's a very difficult proposition. But that is what we have to find the answer to. And at least the Institute of Chinese Studies is doing a very good job with it. And I hope it'll be able to, I don't think the Chinese Studies Institute can do such things, but going into other disciplines, especially things like history, my subject, is even more painful, because you have to go into areas in which which are not immediately of relevance, as they always tell you. I'm always asked, what is the relevance of the subject? And if you're dealing with something in the 17th century, nothing seems to be relevant. And to convince people, especially if they're giving you money, that it is relevant is an enormous problem. So, but it is all relevant. Everything from the Paleolithic age to the Neolithic, to the nuclear age are relevant equally. But to understand its relevance, to see its significance, is a great job. And we have to do it. And the only place it can happen is the university. It's from there that you draw the people for the institutes like this, like the Institute of Chinese Studies and so on. So we have to support the universities, even if you change names, as has recently been suggested for JNU, and so on. I think we can handle that. If you are a China specialist, you've handled so many changes of names. I'm sure we can handle a change of name of JNU also. But let us at least get the proper funding and support for it and the scholarship that comes with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mohanty.
Thank you, Mr. Raghavan, for hosting this. This is a great gesture. I really have very little to add to what.
Closer.
Very little to add to what has been said. Actually, rites of passage are not mere rituals. And when we were discussing and planning this function, basically, the panel that will follow us was challenged to think about the future. And this panel really recollects what has gone on during these 5 decades. We requested Binod Khanna to speak. He bluntly refused. And I did not want to speak. I was ordered by the director to speak. The others were all consensus names, of course. And so what I'm going to do is to really recall the pioneers a little bit, to add a little more flavor to the story of the foundation. Let me read a few paragraphs. This group has been so lucky to have seen each other in the company of competent and dedicated scholars, warm and kind human beings who valued friendships and were committed to the program that they agreed upon to pursue. Giri Dashinkar, the historian, proficient in classical and modern Chinese, brought history and culture as important dimensions to contemporary analysis. A connoisseur of classical music, a most disciplined intellectual worker who would arrive at the office at 9 o'clock and leave at 6, or even later, actually later, who shaped our discourse on peace and security studies. That's why Rajni Kothari teamed up with him and launched this famous program, Global Transformation and Peace, at CSDS. He was a unique pole that attracted all of us. Meera Sinha Bhattacharya, the diplomat turned famous professor, was not only civility and warmth incarnate, and we always say how Meera would have designed it. In fact, when we were planning this function, we were discussing how Meera would have curated it. And was the storehouse of knowledge on India-China relations. Details on our fingertips. Was also the most argumentative amongst us, constantly provoked by Giri and GPD. Binod and I less, I think, but Giri and GPD used to provoke her, and it was most illuminating for all of us. Govind Deshpande, the GPD, famous GPD, the great Indian playwright, who could not speak or write without a spark of a sharp wit or humor, was our unique China expert, equally interested in culture, history, and foreign policy of both China and India. it's very important to notice that the first group had interest both in China and India. They were equally interested in both. GPD's EPW columns were the debating points of the time. The generation of scholars that he produced in JNU is today our main asset. Alka, Sabari, Hemant, Srikant, so many, they're all the products, and they're the mainstay of ICS. The two friends of the China group who are no more and whose contribution must be recorded are Rajni Kothari and K. Subramaniam. Rajni not only opened the gates of CSDS to ICS, and as Ashish put it, it blended so well with CSDS. But Rajni also challenged the China tribe. He used to call us the China tribe. I have dedicated to one of my books to the China tribe in Rajni Kothari's words, as he called us. He used to challenge us to integrate the knowledge of China with core disciplines of social sciences and humanities. That was the challenge. That was the challenge from Ashish Nandi and DL Set constantly. Well, that's what I've written actually in the next sentence. His colleagues Ashish Nandi and DL Set, who are today continuing the tradition, always stood by the China study group. K. Subramaniam not only provided space to the group, actually after we had met here for a few weeks on Wednesdays in these lawns, Subbu learned about this meeting. He one day walked up and said, "May I invite you for a cup of tea?" And IDSA used to be in the annex here. So we went. He said, "From now on, every Wednesday you meet here." So for 1 year, we used to meet there. You'll remember General Banerjee. And Chari continued for a few years. Subbu went to Tamil Nadu and Chari became the director. It continued for some time. But he was also part of the intellectual programs on China and many ICS programs right through. He had many differences of opinion with Mira and Giri, but they were among his close friends and collaborators in many scholarly efforts till the very end. We gratefully remember VP Dutt as the pioneer who led the China programs both in JNU and DU. And in fact, he was then in this building. The SIS was functioning from here when we first interacted with him. He was the historian and the internationally known Indian who was our first link with the China scholars outside India. He was the member of the editorial board of China Quarterly for 2 decades. At the crucial workshop on Chinese studies in India that you saw a picture of, organized by ICS in 2006, with Madhavi Thampi as the convener, BP Dutt's contribution shaped the next phase in many ways of development of ICS and China studies. Today, Thanchung is past 90. He's right now in China and has actually sent a message. He's very active. Last year, we had a book from him, The 5,000-Year Odyssey of China, says. And Isu, his wife and my teacher, both of them were my teachers. Well, teachers of 3 generations, actually. Isu passed away last November.
Passed away?
Yes. Wang Isu passed away. He's no more. Thanchung and Isu trained 3 generations of students in Chinese. Isu's teaching method and her personal care for students and colleagues, not to speak of the grand Chinese meals that she would cook and serve to the China group, has left a deep mark in the minds of China scholars and the China study community. Thanchung, the eminent historian and cultural studies expert, led important programs on comparative India-China cultural and civilizational studies and produced many books after his retirement his two books on Opium War, The Brave New World, and another one on the same theme. But at IGNCA, he produced his many famous books, and thereafter. India-China Cultural and Civilizational Studies. His works are a treasure that inspires scholars in India and China. He pursues his Sino-Indic perspective in his writings with great depth. I'm sorry, I have to talk about some living scholars who may be present here. Binod Khanna, who was present in the foundation meeting on the Sapru House lawns in 1969, remained an integral part of the entire history and is leading a major research project right now. As director of ICS, as the first director of ICS, he put in place the initial structure that Meera Sinha Bhattacharya, who followed him, developed in full measure. C.V. Ranganathan too was among the founding members as director East Asia, who continued his involvement even while being posted abroad. As co-chairperson of ICS, he led some important projects, including Panchashil, that Sanjeev was part of. Another scholar diplomat who has been a great asset and catalyst during the last 2 decades in ICS is Kishan Rana. Leading projects, editing publications, firmly maintaining the principles guiding this initiative, and raising substantial funds. He is today one of the guiding spirits of the entire China Studies group. Ravi Bhuthalingam is the unique scholar coming from the business world and working on aspects of mind and culture which others usually miss. He brings to the group elements of imagination and organizational advice which is rare to find. Unfortunately, Patricia fell ill and is not able to come. Having Patricia Uberoy, the eminent sociologist, as a member of the China group for 5 decades, and ICS's current chairperson, has been an honor and a great asset. She sets high standards, high intellectual standards, and continues to set the vision of ICS. And I'm not talking about the great generation which has already succeeded us. I see them here. Srimati, Alka, Sabari, Hemant, and so many others. There are 2 lessons we have learned. I will end now. And they have been referred to already by the speakers. It is serious scholarship which finally matters. Knowledge of language, history, culture, the interdisciplinary approach, the depth of analysis. We have tried but failed in many ways to see China both as an area, in area study, as a part of comparative studies, India, China and other countries, and as a part of the global historical basis of knowledge formation globally, rather than West as the basis of knowledge formation. We constantly renew this pledge, how to study an area in these 3 respects, as an area, as comparative unit, and as a basis of the global knowledge formation. This is one lesson, and that continues to be our agenda. Second, which Kishan Rana already pointed out, pursuing an independent perspective. Ashish Nandi emphasized that. An independent perspective while respecting diverse opinions. I mean, those debates, we would read each other, comment, destroy, and say, but you have the right to present it and publish it. That's what we learned from each other. Giri Deshankar's editorial pen and so on. Multiple opinions, methodologies, perspectives to maintain intellectual standards as well as social purpose of scholarship. That might generate some positive hope for the ICS. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I speak for everyone in the audience to say that it has been a great privilege to hear 4 wonderfully evocative, but at the same time, intellectually, very, very deep interventions on this 50th anniversary of the Institute of Chinese Studies. So thank you all very much for being part of this panel, and I will now hand over to the next panel because I think we are running a little short of time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Before we wind up, we have the message from Professor Tanchung, which Professor Monty alluded to. So we are just playing that now. Professor Shabri Mitra was good enough to get this message through,
They will play it.
and we thank her for this.
By the way, Madhavan, I had a paragraph on you. I didn't read it.
Last time I'm talking to you, I'm now living in Changsha in Hunan province of China. You see, I'm in my room of a nursing home, and from this room I will one day take off to Sita heaven to join my wife, Isu. Okay. China and India are two civilizations with thousands of years of affinity and fraternity. I have realized this for the last 34 years since I first came to India in 1955. The result of this basic relationship between Chinese and Indian civilization was reflected in the 1950s in the slogan of Hindi Jini Bhai Bhai. It looks like an empty slogan now, but this Hindi Jini Bhai Bhai was from the heart of the common Indian people, and it reflected the basic fact that India and China have been brothers, have been civilizational brothers for thousands of years. I remember when I joined Delhi University in 1964. I and my wife Ishu, we were the first faculty members to join the Chinese Studies program of Delhi University. That time, India was in a very peculiar situation. On the one hand, the 1962 war between India and China had destroyed much of the friendly sentiments between the two peoples. But on the other hand, Prime Minister Nehru spoke immediately after the ceasefire of 1962 that India would never treat China as an enemy, that India would never fight the culture and the greatness of China. Chairman Mao Zedong also said similar things both in 1951 and in 1970 when he met the Indian Charter Fair at the Tiananmen Square. He said India was a great country and Indian people were the great people. On the other hand, the 1962 war made the parliament passing a resolution declaring every Chinese in India as security risk. When I and my wife joined Delhi University, we were, according to the spirit of the Parliament resolution, security risks for India. But we were the pioneers, we were the faculty members to start the Chinese Studies program in India. In the 1960s, many faculty members joined the Chinese Studies program. We had formed a kind of, I will call it, gang of 6, including Giri Deshinka, Meera Singha, K.P. Gupta, Manoranja Mohanty, myself, and Ishu. This gang of 6 formed an informal Wednesday discussion group on China. And I think this group of 6 carried forward the spirit of India-China friendship and understanding. I'm confident that one day all these problems will be sorted out, that China and India will become what the Chinese now describe as 命运共同体. That means China, India, Commonwealth of shared destiny. China and India will become Hindi, Jini, Pai Pai once again. I wish you all good health and happy life. Goodbye.
Now I request Professor Alka Acharya, Professor Ashwini Deshpande, and Madam Nomita Unnikrishnan to kindly come at the dais. May I now request Professor Alka Acharya to kindly conduct the today's proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. So, after that first session, I'm sure all of you would have really a very good idea about how unique the Institute is in the institutional landscape of this country. This session really is a kind of just a little tidbit in between the looking back and then looking at the future. It's a bit of a pause, if you will, in the proceedings to actually highlight what comes from the past and what is being taken on to the future. Professor Nandi actually put his finger on the spot when he said this group was all about a labor of love driven by passion. Brought different strengths and yet had an identity. Complete freedom and very healthy respect for each other. Debating society within themselves, contending hugely, and yet able to bring out, or rather not yet, but because of that, come out with perspectives and views which were tremendously wholesome. And this is really what we saw when we came to the Institute for the first time, because as young students who just about were in various stages of their PhD, to watch a group with Kanchung, Ishu, Giri, Meera, GPD, Manu, Ambassador Khanna, Ambassador Ranganathan, Patricia, just watch them interact with each other was a learning exercise in itself. I mean, you took a statement that was probably making the rounds, or some kind of news that it was making, and there were 8 or 10 different perspectives immediately bringing that particular sentence alive. Meera would begin to give you, put that whole, let's say it was a statement from some leader, she would put it into the context, the international background and the backdrop. Giri would come out with instances in history when this similar kind of statements had been made. GPD would come up with his own incisive analysis about the many meanings of that particular word itself. Patricia would bring in some social. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that this is what constituted the ICS, this wide variety, diversity, multidisciplinary perspectives being brought to bear on a single issue. And it opened up a very different world for us. This session basically is about how we, coming in the footsteps of these great pioneers, absorbed these lessons and have in turn tried to transmit them to our students. When I took over as the first full-time director in of the Institute of Chinese Studies, I thought to myself, what a treasure there is here. And why will not people look at it and say, this has to be supported and promoted? And over the 5 years that I was the director, it just became a series of setbacks, one after the other, when I realized that funds were not forthcoming. That despite this treasure that lay within the institute, people from bringing the depths of universities and providing a platform for training, for disseminating, for promoting, for just about communicating at the popular level, which very often people in the university are unable to do, was just not being accorded the recognition, the importance, the significance it did. So that really is the story of me and my colleagues coming after these greats. But of course, we learned that you persevere. In fact, at one point of time, the resource crunch was so bad, and Manu got up and said, why? We've got Sapru House lawns, we'll go back there again. So this is the spirit really, that you need to be committed, to be passionate. Now, Ashwini, who's GPD's daughter, and Nomi, who's Meera Sinha's daughter, are in Delhi. Anuradha was also supposed to be here, Professor VP Dutt's daughter. So daughters reminiscence just came about because all three happen to be daughters. It's not anything to do with gendered kind of proclivities. But the point here, and bringing them here really is that they too have traversed this journey. And in fact, they've also been looking at how the institute has evolved over the years and how much both Meera and GPD gave to this institute. I remember one fascinating discussion. There was only Giri. In fact, Giri Deshingar's daughter was also supposed to send a message, incidentally another daughter, but she's been unable to send. But there was Giri, Meera and GPD who were sitting and talking, and some kind of argument was going on. I came in a bit later. The argument was like, and Meera turns to GPD and says, but I don't understand you. What is your ideology? So he says, it's a good question to be asking me after so many years. No, are you a Marxist? He said, well, yes, and more. So what more? So he says, well, Well, you know, I like to think of myself as a radical, eclectic philosopher. And so she got very upset and she said, talk straight, GPT, talk straight. Then, of course, Giri came in with his usual, kind of soothing effect, and then she got very wild with him because she said, oh, you Marathis are ganging up. But what I'm trying to say is that here was something that went beyond, this respect. Fundamentally, they differed. They probably, as has been pointed out, bitterly fought. And yet, at the end of the day, there was this respect for each other's work. And this is what I keep telling the future generations. Do not belittle somebody's work because it does not agree with your views. Do not scorn other people's work because somehow it makes you think that you're superior. I think this ability to respect what the other person is doing and has to say and contend with it at that level is something that this institute is known for, and I hope we shall continue. So maybe we can start with you, Nomi, because...
So thank you very much for inviting us on this wonderful occasion. And the title of this session, which is Tributes by Daughters of Pioneers, is not only interesting, and it's also interesting that we are all daughters. So I was in school when my mother, Meera Sinha, and her colleagues, Giri, GPD, Professor V.P. Dutt, and others including Professor Thanchung, to mention only a few names, began meeting regularly on the lawns of Sapru House to discuss the possibility of starting an institution that would offer outstanding scholarship focused on China and East Asia. At that time, the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, headed by K. Subramaniam, was also at Sapru House, and it became a hub for intense discussion and an exchange of ideas, perspectives, and information on defense and foreign policy. Each person who was part of these discussions was feisty. So I think we're all remembering the same things. Well-informed and keen to evolve a deep understanding of the issues at hand. They often had run-ins, and this made the discussions much more interesting. No matter how much they disagreed, they respected one another and often shared research, reports, analysis, and every other resource that they had access to. The Institute was formed 50 years ago, and its pioneers went to work, encouraging others to join them and inspiring young academics to excel in their studies of China, India, and the world. They were soon to be recognized for their valuable and thoroughly researched advice and analysis, not only in India, but abroad. Over time, ICS built for itself a reputation of being truly remarkable as an institution. It brought together and disseminated the work of scholars and published the China Report regularly. It was not always easy to keep going, but such was the belief of the founding members that an institute of this nature was both relevant and essential, that they carved a road forward. And quite apart from external shifts and pressures, one thing set these founding members apart, and that was their passion for their work. I watched my mother, who had set extremely high standards for herself, work day and night, reading everything she could lay her hands on, making notes and writing. Through the years and well past her retirement, she continued being an outstanding scholar who kept abreast of all relevant national and international developments. This was equally true of her colleagues. As daughters of these pioneers, and I'm sure Ashwini will agree with me and share with me the memory of our homes being filled with books, papers, newspaper clippings, copies of articles, and what have you, piled high on every surface. Amongst other things, I recall my mother's admiration for various delegations from China, who, she said, always came to the table having done their homework. our side, she said, needed to be equally diligent. Today I pay tribute to these pioneers, and I also pay tribute to the generations of academics who have carried this legacy forward and who continue to shape ICS. I am confident that ICS will continue to forge ahead with the same passion it inherited from those whose visions put ICS on the map.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for thinking of this panel, actually. It's very unusual, and so whoever's idea it was, bravo. And, you know, the daughters of the pioneers, it's a coincidence that we are all daughters, but in this day and age, it's good that we reverse the gender composition of the previous panel. So actually, it's a good idea to have a daughters-only panel here. So again, that's great. You know, I was just thinking, this is the 50th anniversary of the ICS, which means that my father must have been 31 when these discussions started. And when I think of you know, myself at 31 or 31-year-olds who have been my students, it seems impossible, and Professor Mohanty must have been even younger. So it seems just impossible that a group so young, you know, had the vision to start meetings, start discussions, and then create this institution which is, you know, in its 50th year and looking to travel a much wider distance. And I don't know whether they were aware that they were creating history, or probably not. Because all of them, you know, as you've heard repeatedly, and this is absolutely no exaggeration, they were all of them very down to earth, very simple, gentle, nice people, basically, in a world where we find today, you know, I'm an academic, several of us sitting here are academics, and we find, you know, egos clashing, ideologies clashing, etc. In that atmosphere, when you think of these individuals and their friendships that went at least 50 years, if not longer, it's absolutely remarkable. And as these young, you know, between 25 to 30-year-olds, they had I don't think they had a vision of, oh, here we are meeting in Sapru House, creating history, you know, that's going to last. So it's absolutely, it just struck me today, in fact, just now as I was listening to it, how young these people must have been. And obviously growing up, as Nomi said, you know, they were also socially very friendly with each other. So these dinner parties at each other's homes, and, you know, certainly you saw some pictures of the dinner party at our home in JNU, and those were a very common occurrence. So there were these formal dinner parties where everybody and their spouses would come over, my mother would cook delicious meals, but there were also just addas of people dropping in, you know, Harmala Gupta, who was my father's first PhD student, who for personal reasons left the world of academics but has, you know, made a name for herself in another field. Then Alka, Shobari, Hemant, all of these people who were my father's students actually ended up becoming family members. And people would just drop in at any time of day or night to discuss work, to discuss politics, to discuss personal lives. And so our personal lives became intertwined in a way that I doubt if it happens anymore, you know. You really don't have that atmosphere. I mean, being on JNU campus definitely helped, but it was more than that. It wasn't just the JNU campus. It was just something about all of these individuals. I remember when my father actually passed away, I sent a message to Alka and said, let everybody know. Within, I think, 1 or 2 minutes, I got a message from Professor Mohanty, one of the first messages that I received. I mean, you know, it was just something, the connection was really, really deep. And I think that's, for me, at the personal level, a lesson that we should learn and cherish and take forward to the extent that we can. One of the, I guess, slight regrets, and I'm not sure if I should be raising it, one of the slight regrets that I have is that whether in the realm of the ICS or JNU or any other institutional setup, I would have liked, and I still would like, some kind of a memorial, either a regular occasion or a book or some event in my father's memory, and Professor Monti and I have talked about it repeatedly. In fact, as soon as we've talked about it for the first time when my father just passed away, true to style, Professor Monti just donated a large amount of money in saying, here's my founding contribution and let's do something for GPD. But again, as you've heard, ICS has gone through a lot of difficult and challenging times, and in the middle of all that, that somehow that issue has gone on the back burner. But whether, one idea that I had was perhaps get his columns, the China diary that he used to write for the EPW, and perhaps get a book out, it could be edited, ICS could probably take a lead, or have a scholarship, or a lecture, or something more formal. I mean, we all remember him, and we will continue to remember him, but it would be nice to have him remembered in a more formal way. Whether it's, JNU, I don't know, things are a bit difficult there, but certainly maybe ICS could perhaps think of something doing that. And just a final note, again, I was thinking of my father's last few years in JNU before he left for Pune, and he wasn't as regular in the ICS as he used to be earlier. And sometimes when I would ask him, why aren't you going, he would say, well, it's the phase of economics. Now, those who know politics and history are no longer that relevant in the study of China. It's people who know economics. They are the ones who are going to be relevant for the study of China. And now, as various events are unfolding both in China and in India, particularly in the last 2 weeks, I've been thinking about what he might have said about the relevance of history or politics, and in a very peculiar way that he probably would not, or none of us could have probably imagined, how China and India, both at the level of government and societies, are mirroring each other in a very peculiar way, not in terms of economic issues, not in terms of poverty, land reforms, economic growth, but in terms of what it means to be who are citizens, who are not, what does the question of rights, question of inclusion, question of assimilation, question of nation building, if you like, and how unwittingly perhaps there are these similarities. And if he had been alive, I would have said to him, Baba, politics still matters, and economics, of course, will always remain important, but politics, the importance of politics and history will never go away. And I don't know whether I'm glad that he's not around to see what's going on, or whether we needed him more to be around, to be able to comment on these times. I don't know which it is. But certainly what he was interested in and what he excelled in, which was his sense of politics, history, culture, all of those issues have kind of reinforced and reiterated themselves in both societies, India and China, in odd, peculiar, unexpected ways. And tackling those is going to be a challenge for the ICS going forward.
Thank you both, I think, for... Yeah, I was just going to say that now I would request Srimati to come and read a short message from Anuradha Dutt, who's the daughter of Professor V.P. Dutt, and who has continued to honor her father's memory by assisting and associating with the Institute in very, very significant ways. Pull it down.
Anuradha is not well, so she has sent this message. I'll read it out. She says, I congratulate ICS on its 50th anniversary. I'm delighted to be asked to say something on this occasion. Due to some health issues, I am personally unable to be here today. My parents, Professors V.P. Dutt and Gargi Dutt, were passionate about China studies all through their lives. In their student days, China studies had not really taken off. My father studied international relations and my mother was a student of economics. However, their scholarship under an exchange program between the two governments took them to China, and both of them eventually became serious China scholars. By the way, I was born in Peking and I got a Chinese name, Yan Yan, which means bird. My father's PhD was on China's Republican Revolution, and my mother published a volume titled China's Rural Communes. As is known to most of you here, my father later set up the Center for Chinese Studies in Delhi University, which subsequently became a full-fledged department in 1968. My mother joined JNU School of International Studies and taught there till her retirement. During their working life, China had not emerged as an economic superpower, and not many opportunities existed in China studies, yet both of them encouraged and supported their students to study and research on China. Many among their students became distinguished diplomats and eminent academics. May I say here that their passion for China studies had no limits. Our home, and in particular the dining table, was often a venue of intense discussion and debate on China. I once again compliment the Institute of Chinese Studies for carrying on with promotion and dissemination of China studies in this country. I join all present here to wish it great success in all its future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we shall now conclude this session. Thanks, Ashwini, for reminding us of a task that we have to take up, and Nomi for bringing. Actually, this is really what represents the Institute. So what I would urge now the younger generation, which is now being trained by us and which is now taking their due place in the sun, that these are really the vital qualities that we have to continue to nurture, because that is what makes the ICS what it is, truly unique. Thank you.
May I now invite Mr. Ravi Bhutlingam, Dr. Madhurima Nandi, Dr. Nirmola Sharma, Dr. P.K. Anand, and Dr. Beda Vaidyanathan for the final session. May I now request Mr. Ravi Bhutlingam to kindly chair the session. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've come to the third and final session of our celebratory day. This session was actually to have been chaired by Professor Patricia Uberoy, chairperson of ICS. But unfortunately, she has been taken unwell. So I am kind of last minute and most unworthy substitute on her behalf to chair this session. But actually being an interloper, as it were, is not new to me, because my first introduction to ICS 25 years ago was also as somewhat of an interloper. Because as you've seen from the earlier sessions, ICS scholars emerged from two very distinguished genetic pools. One genetic pool was from the heights of academia, and the other genetic pool was from the heights of diplomacy. And I belonged to neither of these. Rather, I was and am from the world, the chaotic world of business, hurly-burly, sometimes even murky. But despite this very questionable background, I was received with great respect, affection by the ICS fraternity and sorority, let me add that. And I think this anecdote perhaps may reveal something, and I would like our young scholars to comment on it, may reveal a unique quality of ICS, that its ability to absorb different experiences, different people from different backgrounds, to bring them, as it were, into the intellectual matrix of ICS and create something new. Anyway, that's only my own speculation. Let me now move on to the business of this panel. We have here 4 of our bright young scholars who, as has been said before, we see as the future of ICS going forward for the next 50, if not more years. And how do they see the heritage of ICS as it has been, and what are their dreams and aspirations for the future? All this, the 4 of you will have to cover in the princely time of 5 minutes each, because we are running a little late. So I'm going to introduce them very, very briefly by just a line. Madhurima, in the order that they will speak. Madhurima Nandi, who's there, is a doctorate in public health, and she brings to ICS a very important aspect which was not there in the original DNA stream, that is health and public health and comparative health systems. Done a lot of work in this area, and has a strong research program going forward. Dr. Nirmala Sharma, who's sitting right here next to me, is a historian, and she has been a fellow of the ICS Harvard Yenching Institute Fellowship. Her interest is Chinese history, and she has studied Sino-Indian interactions in many aspects, starting from historical time onwards. And she carries forward a very strong tradition in history, which was part of the original stream of ICS from the founding days. On the extreme left is Dr. Anand, whose specialization is manufacturing, labor, and social studies, if I can put it that way. And this is a very interesting mix. It represents interesting interfaces in China, not only today, but in the past, and it is highly relevant in many ways to India in multiple contexts. He spent his time as a visiting fellow at the Harvard Yenching Institute 2 years ago. And he's also been very active in a lot of program activity at the institutes. And last but not least is Veda Vaidyanathan, sitting here right next to me. She is also a Harvard Yenching scholar of the ICS. She completed her PhD from the Center of African Studies at the University of Mumbai, and she leads a very strong, interesting program on Africa studies. China in Africa is the sort of generic title, as you might say. So let me now hand over to each of the scholars, and they can relate to you their vision, dream, hopes, aspirations, perhaps doubts about ICS going forward. Madhu?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at the ICS's 50th anniversary. A few years back, I wouldn't have thought that I would be part of this celebration here. I'll recap briefly my journey into China studies and how I came to ICS, which was quite different from the usual way that people come from China studies to the Institute of Chinese Studies or from area studies. I joined the ICS when it had just shifted to its present premises at Sri Ram Road in 2012. I joined ICS several years after my completion of my doctorate in social medicine, or what is known as public health in the present times. My journey of bringing China into public health research, or rather public health into China studies, began more as an adventure. My training in public health was at the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health at JNU, which is located in the School of Social Sciences. Interdisciplinarity is the core of the conceptualization, pedagogy, and design of the courses taught in the center. So whatever little knowledge I had on China was from an optional course that was taught in the center on comparative health systems, which was designed and taught by Professor Rama Baru, who is also advisor to the health unit at the ICS. While teaching this course, Professor Baru had collaborated with Professor Acharya to give introductory lectures for her course and also drew on the expertise of the senior China scholars like Professor Mohanty and Professor Oberoi. Several generations at this center opted for this course and had an opportunity to study the structure and evolution of China's healthcare system and the politics of its development through this, and through this get a glimpse of changing China. For many of us, it was the first opportunity to learn about China. Out of these interactions, they also had authored a paper on the state and human development, which is the health and education part of these sectors, that was written and co-authored by Alka Acharya, Rama Baru, and Geeta Nambisan in G.P. Deshpande and Alka Acharya's edited book, Crossing a Bridge of Dreams, 50 Years of India-China in 2001. This paper is now an essential reading in the course on comparative health systems that Professor Baru still teaches, and it's been over 2 decades that she has been teaching this course. In 2012, when I got the opportunity to join ICS, I jumped at the idea. We didn't have a plan, but we knew that the potential to study the convergences and divergences in health systems in both the countries had immense potential, and that we needed to start small and gradually build upon the work. With very little funding from the Indian Council for Social Science Research, we established contacts in China and gradually expanded our research activities. In the past 7 years, we have built several collaborations, completed several research activities, organized many conferences, dialogues, published papers, a monograph, and now a forthcoming book that will be out in a few months' time. These have included, our work has actually included a range of topics in the health system, including commercialization of health services, strategies for tuberculosis control, care for the elderly population, medical education, cross-border issues in health, and much more. Our association with some of our Chinese partners over these years has developed into a consortium where we are now jointly doing activities and have been recently recognized by the Asia Pacific Observatory of the WHO as one of the leading consortiums. It is an institute like the ICS where the founders, the senior China scholars have had the imagination and the vision to broaden the contours of China studies beyond the rhetoric engagements on national security and international relations and give space to explore and establish research agendas like ours. I hope in the future China studies will make more space and have the resources for many more scholars from different streams of social sciences who will come forth to study social and human development aspects of China. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu, for that very succinct and important contribution outlining what you have done. Now, Nirmala, over to you.
Okay. I think I'm the only one who took the brief of it's going to be a fun evening too seriously. I didn't prepare any notes, so I had to write down quickly something on my phone. Hence, I carry this. So I'll begin with how I got into Chinese studies. After pursuing a master's in history, I applied for an MPhil in East Asian Studies in the Department of East Asian Studies, Delhi University. There I took Professor Madhavi Thampi's class. I would like to put it on record. That completely changed my life, and actually, kind of my career took shape because of that. Professor Madhavi Thampi is an honorary member, fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies. And because of Professor Thampi, I had come to ICS prior to that, but because of Professor Thampi, I started frequenting ICS for the Wednesday seminars very frequently. I would like to tell you that I had absolutely no idea what kind of jobs were available after pursuing Chinese studies. So I was solely driven by passion to study China's history, Chinese history. I had no idea what lay ahead, whether there are jobs or not, how I'm going to earn money, nothing. So that is how I entered into Chinese history, and then ICS happened. ICS, I came to ICS and I saw that there were so many people, so many experts, Professor Sapru, Mitra, Professor Alka Acharya, my teacher, Professor Srimati Chakravarti, who would meet at ICS and talk about China. Completely shaped, changed my understanding, or it deepened my understanding of China. I was fascinated by China. There was this passion to study and learn this country, civilization. And I was not really driven by, market, whether job. I mean, it is important, but I wanted to study China. And it was driven by passion, which Professor Palat, Professor Nandi talked about at the beginning, that passion is important to study a foreign country. Which then I'd like to talk about why is ICS different from the number of research organizations that exist in India, which study other countries, be it in Delhi, primarily in Delhi, or other places, say other big cities in India. ICS is one of those. Let's talk only about China at this moment. ICS is probably the only place in India, only organization in India which allows people to study other disciplines. I am a historian of China. No other, I can vouch for it, that no other institute, in no other institute you'll find people studying Chinese history, or doing a project on Chinese history or India-China history. Most of the research, or I'm not critiquing it, by the way, that you should not study China from the contemporary angle. It is important, it's very important, because how China is shaping up, whatever is happening, is important for us to know. But ICS allowed people like us, people like me, a historian, or a student who is learning Chinese sociology in China or culture, to come and talk about it, to give it gave us exposure. And talking about exposure, I was also beneficiary of the ICS HYI fellowship, which was initiated, and I got this doctoral fellowship, because of which I could spend time in China as well as at Harvard University. And I was given a handsome scholarship to write my dissertation for 4 years. So this is how ICS has been promoting Chinese studies in India, and this is phenomenal, and I don't think anyone has been doing anything of that sort in India, not that I am aware of. You could enlighten me. As a historian, what kind of work we have been doing in, how much time do I have?
Another 2 minutes.
Okay. So as a historian, what have we been doing in ICS? So we have been, with Professor Thampi, we have been doing this archival project. If you go to our website, you'll see 2 publications on materials on modern China in the National Archive. The whole idea was that how do you study China being in India? And then I'd like to bring in Professor Mohanty's, what he said, that to come up with an Indian angle of studying China, an Indian perspective of studying China. This is what we have been trying to do with the project, and we have tried to do with the project. Like right now, I am involved in a project again. The project basically looks at how the British government, the British regime in India, the colonial government, approached the concept of border making vis-a-vis China. Ambassador Khanna is project director, and we are working together in this project. So, talk about the future. I cannot predict the future. Definitely nobody can. But what we can promise, and all of us can, I speak for them, also because I don't have a note and I have to still talk for 2 more minutes.
1 minute.
1 minute. So I think we all need to excel in what we are doing. I need to do in-depth research in my own discipline. And I also speak for my colleagues here who are sitting. And this is how we take ICS's legacy forward. And again, talking about the uniqueness, Madhurima is a health expert. I am a historian. Veda is an Africa specialist, and Anand works on labor. Also, I'd like to talk about a very good friend of mine who is not here, Bhim B. Subba, who studies Chinese politics. And ICS has given all of us a platform to do what we wanted to do, and not to be driven by the market. The market is important, but hardcore academic research is equally important. And this is what ICS has allowed us by giving us a platform, by giving us scholarships, by giving us jobs. So I would like to end by thanking ICS, and I remain thankful. And wherever I go, I take, in the future, I take a part of ICS with me, and I'll promise to take the legacy of ICS forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirmala. Perhaps it's just as well that you didn't have prepared notes, because what you've said has come across so spontaneously, giving your flow of ideas and thoughts, as it were, that I think the audience has absorbed your experiences in ICS and what it has meant to you. Let me now move on to Anand. Over to you.
Thank you. I think I'll do a little thing on the past, because this crystal ball gazing is not something which I am actually very good at. Maybe I might just leave a few bit of questions, maybe we could just ponder over. My journey at ICS began in 2012. I started as an intern, and I was, I think, one of the last few people who also saw the one at CSDS. I think we sort of shifted, I think 2 weeks after I came in, or by the month end. So I saw both the Rajpur Road and and of course later in Sri Ram Road. And also I got into ICS while I was still doing my PhD, so I could see it in two terms, both pre-PhD and post-PhD. So some of the things which I might say has also seen both the ends of it. Something which got me interested in ICS, which I've seen over the last many years while doing PhD and also after that, I think the anchor of the institution is research. And I think it was my supervisor, Professor Acharya, who had told me once that it's not how wide you know, but how deep you know that is more important. And I think I always make a note of that fact while doing anything in my research, and to make sure that the depth is retained even though you might try to reach wide. So the research component of ICS, whether in terms of research projects or even in terms of what you write, what you speak. In fact, even the ICS research, the blogs which we have started off late for the last 4 or 5 years is called a research blog. So the component of research is extremely important, and that's what I hold as the anchor for the institution. I mean, you might have interdisciplinary, you might have multidisciplinary perspectives for the research, but I think that is something which sets ICS in high standards, and even till date, that is something which is noted as a benchmark, and which many of us, even in our work, we try to do that. And I mean, once we heard that since the program began, that how in-depth research with independent views and ideas, which was encouraged, I think that remains a strong point of the ICS, and that is something which is something important for me. Another thing which is also important, which I have noted with the institution, I mean, building institutions is tremendous amount of work. There's a lot of labor which goes in to build an institution, nurture the institution, and to ensure that the institution survives. And that is something which I have seen with ICS in my own growth as a researcher, and also in both when I was doing my PhD and also after that. In fact, there were times when literally one had to scratch from scratch. I mean, ICS did not have the luxury, again, on account of constraint of funds, that the staff strength was always very small. So the staff, the smaller numbers on deck, the smaller hands on deck, had to put in a lot of efforts to run the institution. I mean, multitasking has been the way forward ever since I have known it. In fact, from 2013, when I took more part in my research activities of the institution, I have been looking at multitasking as, in fact, the seniors have, some of my senior researchers, senior colleagues have told me that without multitasking, you may not be able to get forward. And I think I am grateful to them that over the years that has remained, both the official and the research part, both the program and the research part has been carried forward, which is important. Related to building of institutions, what I think is also important is that what is the homegrown talent? How are they going to be housed? How are they going to be accommodated? And how are we going to get them? I mean, the students who are coming out of Indian universities, especially, I mean, it's not just on China, but generally, how are we going to integrate them? How are we going to get them on board? And the same questions also matter for China studies. I mean, these days, getting a PhD within an Indian institution has a lot of constraints. So, are we going to remain as an institution where we get foreign talent, get them and house them here, or are we also going to do something about PhDs and MPhils and researches conducted within our institutions and our universities? So, I think that the institution is something which is something which the institution has taken care of, and also should be cognizant as the way forward on how China scholars coming out of universities in the country, how they are housed and how they are based, and how do we get the best out of them by getting them on board through various means. And also another thing which sets ICS apart, which I find is important, is also that the research which we do on China in India is also rooted in, or also anchored in, our own historical and social realities. I mean, the questions and the questions of inequality, the questions of poverty, the questions which we look at it in a daily lens. I mean, the questions of class, caste and gender. Those are something which has been, which any institution looking at China needs to take into cognizance. And I think the Institute of Chinese Studies has been one of the institutions which has taken that as a very strong point. And I also believe that in the way forward, while we need more and more scholars, we literally need an army of scholars to study China from various angles and various lenses, this particular content needs to be taken care and need to be cognizant of. I mean, some of the points I'm not going to go over. I think we have seen, Ambassador Rana has already mentioned the need for language. I think that is something which is really important, and we have tried that by various means at the institute, but again, due to resources constraints, fund constraints, or personal constraints, we have not been able to take that to good fruition. So I think that is something which we need to be looking forward to and make a note of. The final point which I would like to make, this is something which I've been grappling with over the last 1.5 years, and in fact, I also get this from interactions with a lot of people. And that is also because of the fact that we have faced constraints in terms of scholarship on China in India. There's the need which people constantly say that you need to wear multiple hats. I mean, it's not just your own research that needs to be important. You also need to be cognizant, or at least be venturing into areas which is out of your comfort zone. So that, or is it we continue to remain sticking to our main point, carry on our own research in our own silos and be a one-trick pony? So it is this wearer of many hats versus being a one-trick pony. That is something which I am grappling with, or I've been constantly debating with myself. And how do I go forward with that? That is something still I'm measuring up. But I think for any scholar who has moved out of university and is looking for a space to do research, how this would balance itself out, or how do we reckon with this sort of debate, is something which I think I would leave it open to all of you maybe to think and ponder over. But overall, the journey at the institute has been really good. I've been really grateful. In fact, I have written I think at least 2 paragraphs for the institute in my acknowledgements of my PhD. So I think that much definitely the institution, I owe it to the institute. And I also look forward in this journey. I mean, there are constraints, both financial, resources, personal, but I'm sure with the mission which we have, which has been passed on from the previous generations and which we carry forward, and if we add more strength to it and more capacity to it, I'm sure we will continue to succeed in our mission. Thanks.
Thank you, Anand. You pieced together very nicely the different challenges as well as the various different strands within ICS from where you have picked up what have made it possible to accomplish the kind of research which you feel the Institute should produce and should continue to produce. Now let me come to our final speaker, Veda.
And I have 2 minutes.
No, you can take no discrimination, 5 for each.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Good evening, everyone. When I was trying to prepare for this evening, because we were given 0 briefs about what to talk about, I sort of landed in this report that was prepared by, it is a statement actually, a statement prepared by the China Study Group a year before I was born, 1988, right? And it's signed by Meera Sinha Bhattacharjee, Giri Deshankar, G.P. Deshpande, K.P. Gupta, Huang Yishu, Manoranjan Mohanty, C.R.M. Rao, Tan Chung, and Patricia Broy. And just at the second last page, they say, and sorry, the title of the statement is Chinese Studies in India, Perspective and Programs. And so it's a 10-pager. And at the second last page, they say, the time has now come when, besides filling the gaps and correcting the imbalances in each institution, they mentioned JNU and DU before, we must take major steps to integrate Chinese studies with social sciences by stressing theoretical, empirical, and comparative work. A checklist of research areas, either discipline-wise or issue-wise, can be easily prepared, and one can specify the thrust areas. But a more fruitful way, perhaps, would be to generally agree on a few major areas where research should be encouraged. The major areas we want to suggest are the following. 1, the development process in China in historical perspective, placing the contemporary economic and political reforms in the cultural, ideological, and evolutionary context. 2, Sino-Indian issues, intercultural dimensions, comparative studies, and contemporary Sino-Indian relations. And 3, my favorite, China and the world. China and the great powers, China and the third world, China and its neighbors, China and the international system. And I think it's interesting and even heartening that when you look at the younger research faculty in ICS today, that between us, we sort of study all of these things that they suggest. So sure, the suggestions were made in 1988, it took a little bit of time, but the point is that, like Madhu mentioned, we all come from very different disciplines, and we've all sort of found I come from African studies, so we've all sort of found our way to ICS. And my journey with ICS began in 2011 summer from very, very deep in South India. I started reading things about China and I got interested. And I noticed that anything I read, a book, an article by an Indian scholar working on China, it had something to do with the Institute of Chinese Studies. So I just gave her a call, the way young people do because you're not intimidated when you're 18. And I asked her, can I come and spend a summer at the ICS? And she said, listen, our internships are not paid. We can give you a room and we can give you access to the library and that's about it. And I said, that's fine. And then she called me back and she said, I'm sure, ma'am, you don't remember this. She called me back and she said, wait a minute, I didn't ask you, why do you want to work? Why do you want to intern at the ICS? And I said, because everybody who's doing anything on China seems to be associated and I sort of want to find out about this place. And then 3 years later, they sent me this notice for the Harvard Yenching Fellowship. And me and Nirmala were the first cohort to win it. And she's already spoken about what it does for you as a scholar, right? Because it puts you in all these different academic spaces, it introduces you to methodology, it connects you to a global network of China scholars, and it's wonderful. But what it also does, it gives you this time and the resources, and it sort of makes China less foreign because it gives you these resources to travel, right? And China is, and all of us who've traveled in China knows it's a wonderful place, especially if you're backpacking. So today when I think of Xinjiang, or if I think of Inner Mongolia, in Xinjiang, for instance, when we were 3 women backpacking in Turupan in a village, there was a farmer who was going in his pickup truck and his wife and 2 little daughters were in the back. And we didn't speak Uyghur, they didn't speak Mandarin or English, and they just sort of said, jump on the pickup truck. And we did, because at 22, still, you trust a lot of people. And then we jumped in the pickup truck, we rode for 10 minutes, and then they stopped in this farm, which seemed like their vegetable orchard. And the little girls ran into the orchard. They came back like their skirts filled with cucumbers and tomatoes. And we sat in the orchard, grinning at each other, eating fresh cucumber, right? Or similarly, another story of another backpacking trip in Inner Mongolia. You go, and a shepherd boy sort of wants to come and talk to you because he's never seen a brown person before. He asks you if you are from Bollywood. You say no, but Bombay, so close. And then, to your complete amusement, this shepherd boy starts singing a Bollywood song. And even though you pretend that you don't know these songs, you sing along because it's fascinating. So what the Harvard Yenching, the fellowship did was, in many ways, it sort of made China not just this foreign entity far away, but a lot of traveling and a lot of meeting local people. I even joined a Swahili class. I didn't learn any Swahili just so that I could meet Chinese students. It sort of helped start bridging that gap that existed. And then when I came back after the PhD, and a lot of people have mentioned this today, what makes ICS unique is the fact that you have the freedom to think and to design projects that you want, the way you want, and you can study whatever it is that you want to study if you can, sit the director down and convince him that this is something that you can do and pull off. And so when I told him that I wanted to, I was looking at China-Africa relations, and I had time to spend in Peking University with fabulous professors, and again at Harvard with fabulous professors. And I told him I want to look beyond the meta-narratives. The question is not, is China neo-colonizing Africa, right? We need to start looking at these Chinese contractors who are going from Guangzhou or Sichuan and who are sitting in Nairobi and who speak English with a Kenyan accent or with a Tanzanian accent. We want to learn about these people and all of these ideas. And it was an immediate, yes, sure, join and do whatever you want to do. So we've started this, what we began with was this pilot project that Ravi sir sort of alluded to, which was basically to study infrastructure development, Chinese infrastructure development in Tanzania and in Kenya. And we've taken case study approaches. And Rajiv Bhatia sir has been one of the people who've been encouraging us throughout the course of the study. So even in this, like many people, it's really crazy the amount of resources we worked with. We worked with very limited funds, but we got people who were as passionate. So we got Chinese scholars on board. We got Tanzanian scholars on board. We took 16-hour road trips from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma and back because we couldn't afford the 1-hour flight. We slept in the same room, the Chinese scholar and I. We shared all of the expenses. We drank no alcohol during the entire course of the study, except the last day in Zanzibar, we chipped in and got a bottle of wine because we thought we should celebrate this. So in many ways, what we are doing here is, again, like Nirmala mentioned, we're all here because we love what we do. We're doing very interesting, what we think is very interesting work. And the fact that today we were sitting here and listening to these speakers talk about the trailblazers and how they sort of set the stage, I think, sure, like Anand said, we have serious challenges ahead of us, existential issues even. But the fact that there are enough of us in this room who are passionate and who want to study, not just the big stories, but we want to study China the way we see China. And I think that's encouraging. And I think that would be our contribution to the ICS legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Veda. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've listened to our 4 young scholars. What is very pertinent, at least to me, is that none of them have attempted to predict the future. They're not fortune tellers. But what comes through very powerfully is that the impact that they see ICS as having made in each of their personal journeys, and a few strands that come out of those thoughts seem to be the passion for work, the freedom of thought and expression, the encouragement, the adherence to high standards, the self-discipline, the multitasking, the ability to put up with, if not enjoy, some of the hurly-burly and discomforts of organizational life. All this is what, in some form of composite, I think our young scholars have imbibed. And listening to that gives me the feeling, as I'm sure it will give you the feeling, that ICS is alive and well in conceptual form, and whatever the future holds a new avatar or avatars of ICS will continue to hold their head high in the future as they have done in the past. Well, for a 3-hour program, we've not done too badly, just a few minutes behind schedule. I'd like to thank ICWA and the director for their hospitality, and now this session is closed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure to propose vote of thanks after the end of today's special event. I will begin by expressing sincere gratitude to our esteemed guest speakers and chairs for their valuable remarks. I thank Institute of Chinese Studies for jointly commemorating 50 years of its establishment. I especially thank Ambassador Ashok Kantha, Director ICS, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, and Dr. P.K. Anand, with whom I communicated for this event. From ICWA side, I would like to thank DDG and JS for their support. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for your participation and time. Please join us for dinner at the fire. Thank you.